We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's May 7th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Ji-hee.
Good morning.
Good morning, and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Happy Tuesday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Now, we are coming back from Children's Day in Korea, which falls on May 5th. Though it is a national holiday dedicated to celebrating children and their future, this year has seen many children suffering around the world. Take a look at the screen for more. While households in Korea were taking their children out for a stroll in the park or rides at an amusement park for Children's Day, many families in other parts of the world mourn the deaths or injuries of their children, namely in wars such as in Ukraine, Sudan, and the Middle East. Heavy fighting continues to kill, injure, and displace Palestinian children inside the Gaza Strip, and Israeli children were among those killed or taken hostage by Hamas militants. Why are we choosing war over children? We should be choosing children over war at all costs, but many children are suffering in conflicts these days. And we're going to shed light on what Children's Day should be promoting, especially this year, by looking back at how many innocent lives have been taken due to the war. And before we do so, let's first talk about how it was Children's Day in Korea this Sunday. When did South Korea designate May 5th as Children's Day, and why? And what did you do in light of this day, Ji-hee?
Well, Children's Day is a very special occasion here in the country, created to promote love and protection for children and to encourage them to grow up wise and strong. Now, it's celebrated as a national holiday on May 5th, which is known as the month of families in the country. Parents typically celebrate this day with their children by visiting amusement parks and other fun places, and children also receive presents. I also remember being a child visiting these fun places with my parents. And in 1923, Bang Jung-hwan, a writer and activist, introduced this holiday to promote children's rights in a world where children were often exploited. Now, originally, South Korea celebrated this holiday on the first day of May. However, as this coincided with Labor Day, it was moved to May 5th. Now, the day was officially recognized as a public holiday in the 1970s, and now most children in South Korea celebrate it like a second birthday and look forward to it.
Exactly. It is a day that many children, including myself, look forward to. Like even for this Children's Day, my parents don't consider me to be a child, but I ask for presents, which does take a toll on my maturity for sure.
Yes.
But as a father to your newborn, she's 1 now, right?
Yes.
So what did you do on Children's Day, and what does this day encapsulate?
Well, it kind of ruined my birthday because all the money I got for my birthday, which is 4th of May, was had to be spent on the 5th of May for my daughter. So thanks for that. Yeah. But no, of course we spent a lovely day together, my daughter and I. It's our second Children's Day together, but she's obviously was far too young back then to celebrate it, but now we get to shower her with gifts and do a lot of things, lovely things for her. But you know, there are various Children's Days around the world, but the world's first Children's Day was actually held and created in Turkey. It was a day designated to comfort children who sadly lost their parents due to the effects of war. Now, similar to Independence Day in that matter. Now, additionally, North Korea and China celebrated on June 1st, and Brazil on October 12th. Now, the other countries such as France, the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, they actually don't have a Children's Day. This is because they intend to ensure that children's happiness is an everyday thing rather than a specific day of the year.
No, I like that meaning. But while we were fortunate in Korea to have a safe Children's Day, there were many households that were grieving for their loved ones. So we're now going to focus on how many children have been killed, injured, or displaced by war.
Well, as conflicts, both major and minor, persist worldwide, children remain among the casualties. For instance, during the Israel-Palestine conflict, almost 34,000 individuals lost their lives by April, with 41% of them being minors below 18 years old. Now, the United Nations further reveals that in Gaza, a child is either injured or killed every 10 minutes. Now, in addition to the loss of life, malnutrition is also a serious issue in Gaza. According to UNICEF officials, 7,000 to 8,000 children are severely malnourished and at risk of death without immediate treatment.
And it's quite depressing to hear that because, as we've mentioned, we're just coming back from Children's Day, which is supposed to highlight the future and the positive things that it holds for a child. But to hear that so many children are at risk as we're speaking is quite depressing. And Walter, would you like to add on to the figures as to how severe the situation is for children around the world?
Sadly, I don't want to add on to the figures, but unfortunately it's the reality of the situation. Due to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war for the past 2 years, many children are suffering greatly. And according to the prosecutor's office, in the past 2 years alone, at least 528 children in the Ukraine have died and 1,230 have been at least injured. Now, over 360 educational facilities have been completely destroyed and more than 3,000 have been damaged. So in an effort to continue children's education somehow, classrooms capable of accommodating over 1,000 people have been prepared in places such as subway stations. Though they are looking to improve the education of children, it's still sad the situations that they're in.
And the situation is really sad, and it's definitely disheartening because these children are very innocent. They have no direct causality or any relation to what's happening around the world. And that's why we asked our viewers what they think about the severity of the situation and the ongoing amount of children that are at risk due to war. If you take a look at the screen, you can find out what 3 of them had to say. Let's hear the first one out. Tira Spell says the issue itself is multifaceted and complicated. Emergency aid, psychological counseling, education, specific programs for the protection of children are needed. Tasmia says, give children enough food, education, shelter, and care. They will need it in the long run. And Leon Teo said, we could start by educating ourselves and learning more about the specific conflicts and the impact they have on children. Other ways would be taking part in sponsorship programs, which can provide essential needs. So as you can tell, all of our viewers are also well aware about how severe the situation is. But to find out more about this front, we're going to include a senior advocate for women and girls at Refugees International in our talks. Stay tuned for a live interview. We're now going to turn to Devin Cohn, a senior advocate for women and girls at Refugees International. Devin has worked for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Lebanon, Uganda, Egypt, and Kenya, and also worked for a variety of NGOs to refugees. Welcome, Devin.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Devin, based on your many rescue efforts, how would you evaluate the severity of the situation in the Middle East and other conflict zones at the moment, and how many children are at risk as we're speaking?
Well, as you mentioned, I've worked in many places in many different contexts where there's displacement and war and protracted conflicts and emergency situations. And we at Refugees International focus our efforts on advocacy and really trying to convince governments and organizations to follow international humanitarian law, set up effective humanitarian responses, and protect the lives of displaced people around the world. So we currently, in my current position, I do not actively engage in rescue efforts, but I certainly have in the past. And we definitely work with other organizations which do, especially those in Gaza, as you mentioned. All of these organizations we work with, we communicate with, and they're on the ground in Gaza reporting the situation. And it's incredibly bad and getting worse. And so, of course, the situation in the Middle East writ large is tense and unsafe and for many and very precarious. But the gravity and severity of the situation in Gaza currently cannot be overstated, especially in comparison to the places I've been. Again, some of the other places I've been have larger scale displacement, but the speed and severity of the destruction in Gaza is really unprecedented. So as you mentioned in your previous reporting and your previous segment, more than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. Actually, as of a couple weeks ago, it was 34,000, so it's more as of now. 77,000 have been injured. And as you mentioned too, many of those are children. Over 13,000 children have been killed, and many more than that injured. So, I mean, it's incredibly dangerous for children and for everyone. But it's the severity is really incredible and really unprecedented. How many children are at risk, you asked? I mean, they're all at risk. All the children in Gaza are at risk. Almost, 80% of the population is displaced. They're all at risk of the bombing attacks and the indiscriminate, I would say, bombing that is not, that is killed, like I said, over 13,000 children. But also, as you also mentioned, the real risk now that is as severe as the risk of being killed or injured is the malnutrition and the starvation really that is being inflicted upon people in Gaza because humanitarian aid can't get in. So children are really the most vulnerable, and so we're seeing, virtually all of the population of Gaza at risk.
I see. So you mentioned bombing and malnutrition, which are putting these children most at risk. Are there any other factors, other things putting their lives at risk?
Well, I would say those are the two main things, the indiscriminate bombing campaign and then also just the food insecurity. So as of several weeks ago, more than 25 people died of complications linked to malnutrition. That's been reported by the World Health Organization, but hundreds of thousands of more face starvation as the siege continues, because there's really a siege on Gaza. The humanitarian aid is not getting in fast enough. We saw that, humanitarian aid workers were killed. I mean, many have been killed, but the 7 aid workers for World Central Kitchen, which is a food, distribution organization that was trying to get food to people. So the other issue with the food insecurity is that doctors and nutrition experts say that children who survive the lack of nourishment and the ongoing bombings and the infectious diseases and the psychological trauma, they are further condemned to face a lifetime of health problems because when there's food insecurity, when there's malnutrition, those effects last for a long time. And also, aid groups, including my own, Refugees International, have been sounding the alarm bells and warning of famine in Gaza for months. And famine is even more than just, your general food insecurity. Famine is imminent, and some say is even already in the northern part of Gaza. So the way that famine works is that once the international bodies responsible for declaring famine do so, it is already too late for huge numbers of people. So many Palestinians, once famine is actually declared, many Palestinians will already have died of starvation, especially children who are most vulnerable. So I would say the lack of humanitarian assistance, the food insecurity, and the effects that come with that are really what put the lives of Palestinian children most at risk in Gaza.
It seems very obvious to this next question, though, but I'd like to know a bit more. Obviously, you said famine is one of the biggest factors in why children are losing their lives. What else do they need the most, apart from obviously the obvious of food and to fix this famine situation?
Sure. Well, what they need most is for there to be an immediate ceasefire, because again, 13,000 children at least have been killed from the military operations. So not as many have been killed or died of starvation yet, but that is going to happen. I mean, the effects of the siege and the effects of the bombings and the effects of the war itself are going to have massive long-term implications and more deaths that come with it. But the actual fighting is what has killed the most children. So needs to be an immediate ceasefire. They cannot be safe without it, and they cannot begin to heal from the trauma they've experienced. So many of them have had family members killed, and almost all of them have been displaced. Like I said, more than 80% of the population has been displaced. They're living in horrible conditions, which is also traumatizing. Like I said, secondly, they need food, and they needed it yesterday. As a result of the last 6 months, most of the children in Gaza will already experience developmental delays as a result of the sustained malnutrition they've had, even if they get food now. So they need adequate, consistent food that is not restricted and held up, and also other humanitarian services. When children are injured, they don't have the medical supplies. The doctors don't have medical supplies to treat them properly. We've heard stories of, children having amputations without anesthesia. I mean, it's really, really horrible. And again, it's horrible in all wars. But as we've seen in Gaza, it has been, the violence the attacks have happened really quickly, and the effects have been really dramatic.
Immediate ceasefire is what the international society has been calling on, but we haven't seen much developments, to be honest. And I think it's up to us now to find ways to better help these children. But especially from our generation, I think we're quite curious, especially if we're living in Korea or somewhere far away from Gaza. What can we do in reality to be helping children in this situation?
That's a great question. Obviously, we cannot do much to help these children directly, like you said, or physically, given the fact that none of us are allowed in Gaza and none of us are in Gaza. But donor governments, the countries we live in and are citizens of, can fully fund the humanitarian response. They need to give money for the humanitarian response, and they also need to encourage or even compel the parties to the conflict to the negotiating table. That's how a ceasefire is going to happen. And finally, we can keep these children front of mind and in the headlines of the media like we are doing today.
All right, that was Devin Coney, Senior Advocate for Women and Girls at Refugees International. Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you.
And as Devin mentioned, I do think that the situation in Gaza and in the Middle East is quite severe. We're seeing more than 80% of Palestinians displaced, and we're talking about children. And even though today's episode is dedicated to share the light of Children's Day, we're not going about in a light aspect. We're actually talking about the grave severity of the situation, which is exactly why I would like to end off today's episode by finding out what we can do as individuals here in Korea to better protect children whose lives are at risk at the moment, starting with you, Chi.
Well, like Professor Devin said, we can't directly help them because we're not allowed in Gaza. None of us live there. But there are various relief organizations worldwide that support children. And like Professor Devin said, humanitarian aid and the money that's needed for that is necessary. So donating even a small amount to these organizations can go a long way in helping children in need, I believe. And for example, since I started earning money back in 2020, I've been making monthly donations to UNICEF and Child Fund Korea. And I receive letters, newsletters that outline how my donations have been used to help children in need. And it really is a great feeling to know that even though it may be small, I've contributed indirectly somehow to help those who are in need, to help really improve the lives of these children.
And I think every effort counts for you to be that attentive and pour your energy and money into it. I do think is the right step in the right direction. What about you, Walter?
I'm not sure if there's any more I could honestly say. Obviously, our guest today told us everything that we can do, and it's something that I'm willing to do now in the future because it's absolutely devastating what children have to go through. We're very lucky that us three have grown up in a situation that's nothing like that, and we should be thankful for our upbringing, whether it be a little bit troublesome or not. We're not in the situation that those children are. Children are the most vulnerable people in the world, and the fact that we have all these selfish leaders of countries who are conducting these wars, and children happen to be suffering the most, and it's extremely sad to hear. So we should definitely donate and help as much as we can.
I completely agree, and I think today's episode really shed light to the severity of the situation, but hopefully, as you can see, no children should be at the cost of anything, especially not war, because as Walter mentioned, they are the most vulnerable. It's us adults that should be protecting them, not putting their lives at risk. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Chi,
Thank you.
and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.